in preparing a budget before. I don't think a single one of them has ever participated in preparing a budget. And secondly, 99% of them have never had any major policy experience. They never held positions where serious policy was discussed in the past. So this doesn't happen overnight. It comes with experience, and it comes with also understanding the nature of the economy, the dynamics of the international community, and you have to craft a budget to address both variables. The country's position in the world and its interaction with the rest of the world, and the realities of the economy in Guyana, and ensuring that the measures in the budget live up to those realities or take account of those realities. We can't get that from this opposition. So we're going to remain at the same sort of thing. Every day for the remainder of the budget, you will hear the same sort of criticism, nothing serious. Now, there are, however, a few things that are worth responding to. And they've come from some haters and some maybe who are seriously misguided. So I saw a news story in the Kaieteur News called Budget Diplomacy. And that news story spent a long time, or in a lot of words, criticizing Ashni Singh for speaking about a minimum threshold, and concluding that in such a large budget and with a country that is growing so rapidly, that the Minister of Finance is relegating us back to a minimum threshold, that the ambition for people doesn't match the enthusiasm or the growth of the economy. And we need to ensure that people understand what the minister meant when he said minimum threshold. So first of all, in the budget, the minister defined the two key objectives of what we are working towards. He said, first, this minimum threshold that we must work to accomplish for all of our people. And secondly, creating the conditions for wealth creation. So two objectives that we are working towards. Particularly, he defined it as an expansion of household wealth. The minister made it clear that we must not view the minimum threshold through a narrow, and this is direct quote, and simplistic monetary and fixed income lens. So the article quoted the minister saying that, and then proceeded to do exactly the same thing, to view the definition of minimum threshold as a fixed income or a monetary threshold. When the minister made it clear, and I've spoken about this at the press conference, that we are redefining these concepts. So the first concept, you would recall that I said in the healthcare sector, we're redefining primary health care to include a higher level of care, which would include now access to CT scan, a free CT scan, access to free ultrasound, access to a number of free tests that in the past you had to pay for and were defined as tertiary care that came out of the private sector. We are redefining it, moving it from tertiary paid care delivered by the private sector into the category of primary health care now, because we want the quality of primary health care to grow. And that is one of the objectives of us building out the new hospitals with new facilities to ensure that we can deliver on this redefined objective or redefined concept of primary health care. Similarly, we have said that every Guyanese in this country must have a minimum threshold in terms of the quality of life. It is not a minimum income. It is not a minimum fixed income. It's not a monetary target that we're heading towards, but it's a threshold, a minimum threshold for quality of life and quality of services delivered by the state that the state will almost guarantee. And that involves, as the minister pointed out, it involves a number of things. It involves housing. So let me quote exactly what the minister said. He said, "I hasten to add that this threshold is not to be viewed through narrow and simplistic monetary and fixed income lens, but instead is to be viewed from a multi-dimensional perspective. Every single Guyanese family should have access to decent housing, including the potential to own their own home, sufficient nutritious food to ensure zero hunger in the country, good quality health care from conception to old age, relevant educational and skills training opportunities," and I can go on. So the minimum threshold that he speaks of is a quality of life in metric. It is not a fixed income metric. And he made that point. However, this editorial, or I don't know if it's an editorial or a news story which says budget diplomacy, confuses the whole issue because they didn't read carefully what the minister said. And I thought it necessary to respond to this because sometimes people miss the concepts. They miss the concepts and they go back to their old understanding of things. Because when you talk about threshold, it is generally thought of as a monetary figure. It is not a monetary thing we're talking about. Although eventually universal income could become part of the package of measures that would form the minimum threshold. So that is the first objective towards which we are working as a country. We want to eliminate poverty totally. We want to make sure every Guyanese citizen is living in a decent place that they own or they can afford to rent. We want to make sure that we have high quality health care for all of our people. We want to make sure that every child or every adult, if they want to study and improve themselves, that there are opportunities to do so. We want to make sure that everybody lives in safety by investing in the security sector, that they can live in free of fear. We want to ensure that people live in a democratic society, this is the minimum threshold that we are talking about. Although it's tucked away in the budget, it's a concept that is impregnated with a lot of ideas. A lot of ideas. It's a broad reaching concept. And unfortunately, the person who wrote this story or this editorial missed that. So the second objective is, do we want only the minimum for our people? We believe that the state must guarantee this minimum. But beyond the minimum, we want every Guyanese to become wealthy through their own efforts. So the state guarantees the minimum, and then you create the conditions for people to grow their wealth, personal wealth, household wealth, their business wealth, whatever their endeavors are. You create the conditions for them to grow income and wealth. That's the second objective, because we would like to see all of our people get wealthy. And we believe they can do so, so they're not bound by the minimum threshold that the state will guarantee. The state will guarantee to ensure that all of our children can go to school and have a good quality education, but you're not bound by that. That is only what's guaranteed by the state. Through your own efforts, through investments or higher education, you can become more marketable, your skills, you get higher income, you grow your wealth, personal and business wealth. These are the two key objectives that we are working towards. They're people-centered. When the opposition said, oh, it's not a people-centered budget, it is not a budget for the people of this country or poor people, they missed the concept. The concept explains it all. They lost sight of that because they probably are also deluded by a similar thinking as the person who wrote this editorial called Budget Diplomacy. So that's the first point I wanted to make today, because I think it was worth clarifying, and even for those in the parliament. And so they should pay closer attention to these two concepts. The second one, another editorial, I think it's in the Kaichor News, Jagdeo, a leader of glaring contradictions. So basically saying we are not a rich country as yet. Quoting me as saying that we are not a rich country as yet. And further saying that I spoke of us eliminating poverty over time, etc. And then saying, how could he say this, but they're borrowing so much money to spend? A poor country should not really be borrowing so much money to spend. And on the face of it, it sounds maybe logical. But we don't live in a vacuum. And we have had explanations numerous times about how we have progressed as a country. Some people made it seem, like Ramjatan, that we just recently in a speech said, we have all this money to do whatever we want to, and when they get into office, they'll give it all out to people. Glenn Lal has been saying to people, we're so rich because of the oil and gas resources, We don't need to work any longer. We can all get $8 million handout from the Treasury, and we don't need to work any longer. And I think this is extremely dangerous. That is why we had to point this out, that it creates a syndrome of dependency. Now, we've made it clear that over time, the resources in the oil and gas sector will accumulate at a magnitude where we'd be able to, in a growing way, address more and more needs of our people. But we will never come to a point in our history when the citizens of this country will just sit down at home and receive a check and have to stop working. Not a single country in the world has gotten to that stage or will ever get to that stage. And so it is only a charlatan, a clown, who will promote that sort of philosophy, that you can stop working and the state will get enough money to mind everybody, to put it crudely. So we have had a hard time in saying to people, we're not wealthy as yet, but we have made progress. We have moved from a 300 million economy, US dollars economy, to a $22 billion economy, US dollars economy. I had to point out, notwithstanding this growth, that this doesn't speak about the distribution of income. I think it was Oil Now who asked me a question about this issue. However, our economy is larger today. So we are growing. When we had a $300 million economy, we had blackouts under the APNU. We had blackouts that lasted 3 weeks at a time. No roads to drive on. The hospitals didn't have any drugs. People were fleeing this country in droves. There was no democracy. We didn't have food in some years to eat. We've come a far way from those days, a far way from those days. But we're not wealthy as yet as a nation. We've just had come out from, now we are ranked a higher middle income country, and we will probably move into maybe the OECD level very soon, even higher than that, the middle income, emerge out of that, the lower high income country. But it was only a relative recent phenomenon, and it was largely because of an enclavic sector, the oil and gas industry. So we had to point this out, that we are not wealthy as yet. We still, if you look at the revenue flow to the budget, if we were to do what they suggested, either the opposition or Glenn Lal, in a single year, we'll bankrupt the country. We'll bankrupt the country based on giving $8 million to every single person in this country. You'll bankrupt the country in a single year. You just calculate for yourself and you will see that. So we had to point this out. However, does this contradict our borrowing strategy? And that is the point. Jagdeo, a leader of glaring contradictions. Why are we borrowing more? What are we borrowing for mainly? We're not borrowing to eat. Most of our recurrent budget is self-finance. That is from revenue. If you look at our recurrent budget, the capital budget, we borrow mainly for capital expenditure. And anyone who knows, if you have a business, you borrow to invest in the future, for future income. And all of these investments that we are making will enhance our capacity to have greater income in the future as a country, more revenue, so we can get wealthier. Secondly, the investments are made so they can reduce costs. Like last week I pointed out to you that we will save, the people of this country will save minimum $100 million per year when the gas to energy comes on stream because of lower electricity prices. 100 million, $1 billion or 200 billion Guyana dollars in 10 years they will save from that single project. And that is only from cheaper electricity. Forget the coking gas and the other stuff. So that's the sort of investment. You have to borrow. But I see this whole question of borrowing is a central question on the debate again. Oh, why are you raising the debt ceiling? Are you borrowing too much money? And I want to point out to you that in spite of the borrowing over the years, our debt to GDP, that is debt as a share of GDP, the economy, has come down from if you lose Guyanese's figure, it's 900% of the economy, or if you use the finance figure, it depends on the starting year, 600% of GDP to today in this budget. Last year, it's 27% of GDP. One of the lowest debt to GDP figures in the world. In the developed world, it's over 100% or near 100%. In the United States of America and Europe, their debt to GDP, that is how much the government owes in relation to the size of the economy, is nearly 100%. In the Caribbean, it gets over 50%. In some countries, it's over 100%. We're 27% of GDP. That's one of the lowest figures in the world. And from over 100% of revenue to service debt, this year we're at 6% of revenue. One of the lowest figures to use for debt service too. So we don't have an unsustainable borrowing strategy. So there is absolutely no contradiction. The contradiction is only in the mind of somebody who doesn't understand that you have to invest for the future too. And that the two things are not contradictory. But of course, this has come out of the very fertile fantasy minds of many some of the haters in the Kaichor news. And this is the contradiction they're talking about. And it reflects again, the budget presentations about borrowing, etc. So Norton made a speech recently, and I believe he must have had something to drink. I looked at him carefully at the his cost of living rally. And so I was expecting, with the level of mobilization that they did, that the entire parade ground would have been inundated with people. And I must say it was a bad showing. As a politician to a politician, that was an abysmally bad showing. And if you notice the demographics, there are hardly any young people there. It's the same people who've been in the APNU for a very long time from decades ago. And I think they respond readily to the rhetoric of hate because young people are intolerant to that. And so that's why they didn't show up there. Or even if they had showed there, the rhetoric of hate and the rhetoric of the past would not have resonated well with them. But that did not prevent Norton from going to his familiar territory and spouting this old rhetoric. So he had, the first thing he said is that they want to bring all the people of the country together. But when they get back into office, they will fire the PPP supporters from the public service. So if you want to talk contradiction, that's a contradiction. But we know that it's difficult for Norton to hide his true feelings. And sometimes they come out in unguarded moments. And sometimes you can create an aura of national unity because it's good for political purposes. But when you speak often and speak in sometimes from the heart, your true feelings come out. And I think that is what happened to Norton on that day. So reminiscent of the vulgar rhetoric of the past, they will fire the PPP supporters from the public service. Just imagine if we were to say something like that. The whole country would be in uproar. You'd have 5 letters going to the UN and every organization written to in the world, and it will make the front page of the newspapers, etc. Norton said it, and it's accepted by many people in this country. And the thing is that we believe, contrary to what Norton believes in, that all the people of this country deserve an opportunity to enjoy this basic threshold, the minimum threshold that I spoke of earlier, and also to grow wealthy. And we will work in the PPP civic government to ensure that every child and every person, regardless of their race, their religion, their gender, or their politics, they have that opportunity. We will never use the litmus test of politics in recruiting people in the public service. And that is why when we came into office, if you look at what happened by contrast, APNU terminated a large number of people. In the public service, I can tell you about the office of the president, a lot of people got sent home there. And then in many of the other sectors of the economy, the sugar industry. You contrast that with us in office. The politicians lost their jobs. Harman still wanted to stay on. You remember he wrote a letter that he wanted to stay on because he was the head of, not the head of the presidential secretary, I don't even remember what they called him at that time. But some of the others, and that they lost their jobs. Now, these were people who were trying to out there who were part of the politics. They had to. We had to terminate people, but not ordinary people. That is the difference between APNU and AFC and the PPP. That's the difference between the PPP and APNU. And that is why we've stayed in office for long periods, because we are focused more on national development and working towards all of our people. I see Demerara Waves still carries, the PPP mainly Indo-Guyanese party. Look at a story just 2 days ago, mainly Indo-Guyanese. And then they will say APNU largely Afro-Guyanese. So we are mainly Indians, and that's largely Afro-Guyanese. But if you look at our composition, if you look at the support we're getting, we're the only party that cuts across race today in this country. A party worth its salt. I'm not talking about the three members party and stuff like that. I'm talking about big parties here. So they keep perpetrating that, but the fact is on the ground. So when Norton complained in his speech there that Ashley Singh spoke about a 50% increase in support in membership in membership in Linden, he might have said that in terms of the council seat. We didn't say 50%, but 2,500 people voted PPP from the town for the PPP more than in 2018 in the local government elections in the township of Linden, or the town of Linden. 2,500 persons voted. He ignored that. At his speech there, he talked about Ashley Singh saying 50% in Linden. He's a bit touchy on Linden. He didn't speak about Madhya. He didn't speak about Bartica. He didn't speak about Georgetown. He didn't speak about Mokka, Kwakwani, or New Amsterdam, about what happened here. And in Linden, he distorted what we said. 2,500 persons. Some of the small parties did not get 2,500 votes, and we got 2,500 more votes in these elections in Linden itself. They didn't get that in the whole country. So he ignored all of that in his speech there. The second thing that he wants to do, he spoke about, oh, we've taken away the buses that Granger put in these villages and stuff like that. Now, these buses, let's make this straight. The buses that Granger got and put his name on, and he got donated to him from businessmen, many of whom were getting contracts from the government without tendering. So those buses never entered into the records of the government. So we don't know who they belong to, if they belong to Congress Place now, many of them. So that's one. Two, many of those were reconditioned buses, the boats, etc. So what did APNU do to our children? I said last week, $1.6 billion per year, they took that away, the 10,000 grant. If you multiply 1.6 billion per year over 5 years, that's $8 billion. $8 billion can buy you over 1,000 buses. Imagine 1,000 32-seaters, that's 32,000 children per year we could have fetched around the country. And they are so proud about the 20 buses that they put on the road, old buses, but can't speak about the 8 billion that they took away from the children of the country. And you notice these people are shameless. They still continue with the 3,000 for the pensioners, and in the 5 years they gave $1,400 per year to the pensioners, and took away their water and electricity subsidy. They're still shameless. So Norton speaks about that in his speech there again. He then says he wants to end the Gold Scholarship program, because this is for friends and family of the PPP. So under Norton, you will not get a scholarship. You shouldn't apply for, wouldn't get an online scholarship, because he will end the Gold program. He has a problem with the part-time workers too. He said there is a PPP people designed for politics, he will terminate the 15,000 part-time workers. The 22,000 gold scholarship, people who were on gold scholarship would have never gotten those scholarships under Norton. The 15,000 part-time workers will be terminated. So that is news for the part-time workers in the country. They'll be terminated. No doubt he will terminate back again the 2,500 CSOs in the Amerindian communities too that they terminated in the past. Because he is on a policy of terminating people. You know, you must, first of all, you mustn't get a part-time job, you mustn't be PPP, you mustn't be Amerindians. So that is his approach to running government. And it's all revealing itself in his speech or his rambling there at the parade ground. So he then says, tell your neighbors how things are bad under the PPP. Now, if you have to tell your neighbors how things are bad, and your neighbors are not there, it's gotta be, how stupid can you get? You gotta go back and tell your neighbors how things are bad under the PPP, as though like your neighbors don't have a capacity to make their own judgment. And you know why such few people went there? It's because the neighbors are telling them that things are improving under the PPP. Because for sure, more people are getting scholarships. Over 50,000 people more are working, and when APNU left, the children are getting back their grant. The pensioners will see their pensions double by next year, already 75%. We restore the water subsidy to the pensioner, the electricity subsidy. The joint services have their 1 month bonus back, which cost us now about $1.6 billion more they're getting every year that APNU took away. The people in the productive sectors have had the VAT on machinery and equipment removed from their equipment so they can go back to work. In the education and health sector, the corporate tax has been removed from these sectors, so more investment. I can go down the long list. I can go down a long list of things. But these people, more roads are being built in communities, so they believe you shouldn't build more roads. It's a waste of time to build roads. In fact, one of them, I think it's some finance or so, said that you can calculate how much more money we're spending and hand it out to the people, 8 million or something like that. Give it, don't spend it. So can you imagine, take all the money in the budget, give it to somebody, and don't do anything for education, healthcare, electricity. So we walk in the dark, we walk down a road that is not built, and I don't understand. Like, we go back to the Stone Ages, but people have their 8 million in their pocket. You know, it's ridiculous. So this is Norton. Tell your neighbors. Well, the neighbors will tell you a different story. Even the road has been built, I told you, to straight up to Norton's Pig Pen in Linden. And I went there, it's a partially paved road, and they told me this was recently done. And I'm happy for him because I think it's a good sector. You make a lot of money in it. In fact, if he need more breeding animals, the year before, Zulfikar Mustafa produced about 4,600, and he's Muslim, so I shouldn't be talking about the agriculture sector, produced 4,600 breeding animals, and last year much more. They should help Norton. Anyhow, what he said was a bit dangerous, however, at the end. He says they're going to win the elections. Well, that's not dangerous, that's laughable. But that's not dangerous, that's grossly delusional. And that's why I'm saying he had to have had something. He had to have had something to conclude that. But that when they win, we will not want to leave, and we would want to resort to violence. Now, coming from Norton, but guy who said he had the SOPs but couldn't present them in the court. He had the SOPs in his back pocket, right? Keeping it at Congress Place to show they won the elections. People who come from a track record of stealing elections and resorting to violence. You look at 2015, there was no violence when it was declared the PP lost. The transition took place. You can't say the same about the previous elections in the past. Maybe the only time was 2006 when they didn't. Every time Upton was lost, they've resorted to rhetoric or violence. And they were urging people in 2020, you recall, to come out on the streets when they tried 3 times to swear in David Granger. And to people to come, and people shunned them then when they were in power, when they had something to give to people too, basically, and they were just sharing out to cronies only, basically, not ordinary people, cronies. So when they were in power, people refused to come out and support them. You remember a couple of people coming in front of the Ministry of Finance when they were lying to people. They had control of every state media, and were dominating the airwaves with the lies all the time. And people ignore them. Do you think now, knowing Norton and knowing the lies that they've been telling and seeing the track record they had, seeing that they have no plan now, no vision, no strategy, looking at the dismal performance in Parliament, you think they're going to risk their future again with APNU and their children's future, take a gamble again? So this call for violence, you have to watch it seriously, and let Norton not delude himself. Any act of violence will be met with the full force of the law. But I think it was more of his rhetoric there at the rally to whip up people. But you notice that he is toned down on the racism a bit, although it came out. And then they have Ramjatan pushing the racist line. So Ramjatan is a regular slime bag. I call him that all the time, a regular slime bag. This is the guy who will do anything to be offered a position in government. In fact, he said as much to me. He'll do anything, prostrate himself, say whatever he's told, etc. Like, so I'm not going to deal with all of what he said. Jagdeo never liked public servants, etc. That we're stingy. He went on with the borrowing too, but he doesn't know much about this stuff. So this is what he said. And all the emoluments under this budget for that, 100,000 people, come up to $121 billion. It was talking about the 10% of the budget that we set aside to pay wages and salaries alone in the public service. Nearly 10%, $121 billion. And Jagdeo and Ashney does not want to have that shifted upwards. I'm quoting him directly here. Public servants come from a certain demographic, and you know what I'm talking about there. So nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You know I'm talking about Afro-Guyanese to a crowd there. It was made up mainly of Afro-Guyanese. So saying, oh, they're racist. They don't want to pay only 10% of the budget set aside for wages and salaries. If you look around the world, it's a high percentage. But they got him to push that line now, the Ramjatan. Oh, nudge, nudge. And then he goes on to say, capital expenditure is $166 billion. That money will go to a set of contractors, and we got only about 1,000 contractors. Well, 1,000 under APNU, you have much more now, who win contracts in a big way. And you know they come from a certain demographic too, and you know what I'm talking about. That's nudge, nudge, wink, wink, that's Indian people, right? So racism, pure racism, to a crowd that's Afro-Guyanese. Just imagine if we do something like that. This is the racism, but they have this slime bag doing it. He's told you to deal with that issue because he's Indo-Guyanese. So then it wouldn't be seen as racism. But it is racism, the promotion of racism. They can't get away from this rhetoric. If you talk about cronyism, if you talk about contractors who got the bulk of the awards under APNU, you have about 4 or 5 Indian contractors who got the bulk of the award under APNU. You have more Afro-Guyanese contractors now than in the entire 5 years of APNU. Entire 5 years of APNU. When they were talking about the contract, the people who bid for GWI and said it's mainly Indo-Guyanese who were getting. The person, one of the 2 contractors, black contractors who they bid, said they shouldn't be talking about us now, me, because I used to get contracts under the PPP at GWI. They chased me out of there, basically. I didn't get a single contract in GWI for all the years. Why are they talking about that now? Because they were giving it and picking. You had to carry a bag of money, and they know to whom, and then the contracts were given. They talk about cronyism and contract, like we're putting all of this money to give to contractors, it's corruption. They didn't even have to put the money. They were just, they didn't have a tender process. Look at the Patterson issue. The projects were not getting built and the people were being paid. We got Durban Park, the scale, the bridge. We got millions of examples. At least, and to do capital projects, the reason we could have grown the capital budget, it requires hard work to put together feasibility studies. They didn't want to do hard work. They had the easy life, the good life for the cronies. They didn't want to do that. You think a project of the nature of the gas, the energy would fall out the sky? They didn't want to put in the effort. I told you personally, because before the project was tendered, I had over 85 meetings at my office with the task force, including them, to move that project up to the stage of it being tendered before it was tendered. That is how much work it required, because there's so many moving parts. That was even before tender. You think they were going to put any effort into that sort? And that's just one project. There are many others, the Ministry of Finance, the President himself, a number of people who sit down day to day to put together these projects. Oh, we had an idea to pave the road from Susdike Junction to Linden. Well, why didn't you do it? Jordan went to the IDB and said he could get 900 million. It was a lie. It was only last year that after working on the project and doing the studies and everything else, which we were prepared to do. We were prepared to do the studies, the feasibility work, design stage, that last year the loan was approved. It requires hard work, and that is why they don't see that effort. They think, oh, the capital budget is high. That's why they had the lowest capital budget for our contemporary history, lower than 2014 in most of the years that they were in office. But that meant a running down of the infrastructure of the country. If you don't have a capital budget, you can't build roads, you can't build bridges, you can't build power plants, you can't build schools, you can't build hospitals, you can't build sea defenses, You can't build the community infrastructure, the grounds, etc., that people want now. But they begrudge it. Oh, it's money set aside for contractors. But when you look at the cronyism, imagine Amanza Walton talking about cronyism. Amanza Walton talking about cronyism. The biggest cronies were people like her, in Linden, when nobody could get land there. How come she and two other members of her family got land and almost close to the budget, the election time too? That is cronyism, because she was politically connected. That is the biggest cronyism. When we talk about, you're talking about cronyism now? Cronyism, the scholarships. One minister, two children. I used to say $30 million, and I was told that it's $75 million, one minister. Simona Brooms, who I gather was at the same square too, the parade ground, talking about cronyism and everything else. Two of her children got scholarships, $75 million, and they were not Guyana scholars. They only got these scholarships because the mother was a minister. There are 4 other ministers who got it. You want to contrast that with 2,500 people that are studying, or the free education now for all the people at UG are wiping out their loans, or the children grant back? How could that be cronyism when it's for all of our people? Everybody could apply for the Gold Scholarship. Everybody will get the benefits from free university education. All of our children collect the grant. How could that be cronyism when you yourselves took this? The land policy, if you want to talk about it, look at the people who they transfer lands illegal to. Were all connected to the PNC. 4 of persons from the office of the president got over 3,000 acres of land. 3,000 acres of land. They sold land to people and collected money at a low price and didn't even tell the people where the land was, just at Ogle. We've had to settle. They're talking about cronyism. Cathy Hughes. Cathy Hughes is giving contracts to herself in her own ministry. That's cronyism. Ministers, a lot of these ministers, Ramjatan, oh, his ministry was a load of sale of gun licenses. Gun licenses were selling there like crazy. Norton talked about security firms that we are putting in place that would participate in violence at election time. You find out how many security firms are established and guns sold to them by that ministry. Cronyism. You asked Roysdale Ford about what was going on at the Gaming Commission when they tried to extort Sleep In for a casino license. Extort him. Want to try to get him to pay $3 million for a license. And I told him to refuse it. And I spoke about this in opposition. So it's not new. I went in on my Thursday press conferences in opposition. I called the names of the people too. So you're talking about cronyism. Ask them about the Integrity Commission report and what happened in those 3 years they didn't file the reports about the accumulation of wealth in those 3 years. It's unbelievable that people would talk about cronyism. My Paul, from what I gather, was, apart from his financial difficulties with money at Congress Place and the UG, he was, my Paul was getting salaries from several places. Carol Joseph was an advisor in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. God help us. We forget about this sort of thing. And these are the same people talking about cronyism. Oh, PPP people getting rich, 20 of them will get wealthy. Call their names and see if they're getting wealthy legitimately or not. And if you know anything illegal, then fine, expose it, like what I did. When I went in opposition, I called the names of the people who got the land and the breach of procedures. So these are some of the things I wanted to talk about. I saw Amanza Walton again with, you know, love this show and rhetoric and just very, very vacuous sort of presentation. So, oh, the Caribbean, we must approach this future from two perspectives: national unity. This is the person who believes that Indian have a diminished mental capacity, you know, and national unity, and who every utterance goes back to race or somehow winds its way back to race. And secondly, she said that the PPP is not so concerned about the territorial integrity of our country, that they have, in APNU, they hold a monopoly on patriotism, basically implying that in her presentation. It's unbelievable. But the problem is that they gave her this portfolio, and obviously it's overwhelming her. And all the people who are helping her to write these speeches and advising her, they're just confusing the poor person. They're just confusing her, because if we trace, if you had any integrity, you would just trace our engagement on borders from the past and contrast how the PPP approached border-related matters and our successes, and that with APNU. And then that will tell you the whole story. I'm not going to deal with it today, because that's conversation for another day. I saw the IPADG once the award that President Ali will receive in Africa withdrawn. And they're saying, oh, that the award is given for equity and probity, and President Ali's government doesn't meet those standards. Well, I suspect the African leaders are going to just ignore them totally. And it's really shameless for IPADG to talk about equity and probity. First of all, we would like to get the accounts and the details of it, of how they spent the nearly $500 million that they were given of taxpayers' money. Our money, for a small organization. They need to tell us why they excluded other Afro-Guyanese organizations. So, there is no probity in their finances now. And in terms of equity, we saw they gave a couple $100,000 of the money for scholarships. The rest was spent on IPADG itself. So there is no equity in that. This was given to assist Afro-Guyanese and Afro-Guyanese organizations pursuant to the Decade of African People at the UN. Not for them, not for their use at IPADG. So where was the equity and probity? It's when these organizations that claim they represent Afro-Guyanese, they're seen through by the international community. Rickford Burke and all of the, I don't know, I haven't mentioned him in a few weeks, he must be getting bored. The criminal Burke hiding away. I saw he's suing Gail Teixeira for 500 million. He could sue for 10 billion. We want him here. He should come to Guyana and sue. He should come and sue people here. I hope. So he wants to sue Gail Teixeira sitting abroad, but he doesn't want to come to Guyana to answer for his extortion charges, where he is trying to extort a businessman, criminal extortion. He doesn't want to come and face the music here. But the criminal Burke and his ilk, they've overplayed their hands. And now people in the US government, the State Department, everywhere, they understand what is that this is a business for people like Burke. He makes money personally from this sort of thing, using Afro-Guyanese causes to raise money for himself, and he converts into use. This guy hasn't worked for 15 years, from what I gather. For 15 years, he doesn't work. He lives in the US. So clearly, he has to be conning people to live. And we've had this case of him conning. There are probably many more that we don't know of. But they've overplayed their hands. And people are now coming to find out. And what they're also doing, they're disparaging some of the African leaders and others who are giving this award to President Ali. What they are saying is that the only reason they're giving this award is because the people want to get favorable treatment in Guyana, concessions and stuff, for business side. Basically accusing them of being corrupt. This is the extremism of all of these groups. Of course, they have little resonance internationally and less resonance here. IPADG got nearly $500 million of taxpayers' money. Ask anyone in the villages, Afro-Guyanese villages of the country, whether they've ever seen them, the leadership, or know them. They're spending this money, holding conferences at the Marriott and other places, but they'll never go one day to the villages to assist. I'm proud to say that this government has been going everywhere, to every village in this country to assist all of our people. So I think I'll end there. Thank you. Thank you very much. I promise to be short today.
Reverend Belgrave, Kaiser News. Dr. Jagdeo, Dr. Singh, during his budget presentation, expressed concern of how possible rising interest rates could stress debt service. In the circumstances, why not work with an existing debt ceiling instead of raising it?
I didn't get that.
Dr. Ashney Singh, during his budget presentation, he expressed concern of how possible rising interest rates globally could stress debt service. In these circumstances, why not work with an existing debt ceiling instead of raising it?
So there are analytical parts of the budget, and often you show the international context. So the fact is that interest rates have risen steeply over the past 3 years. And they have created a huge problem for many developing countries that in terms of higher debt service. We anticipate that based on what has happened, and I explained this some time ago, that this was in response to the massive liquidity overhang that you had in many countries from the COVID period, and also in response to inflation, higher inflation rates. Inflation rates have been falling globally, and therefore we believe that the interest rate spike is at its peak now. In fact, many central banks around the world are talking about interest rates coming down, especially now that it may be having a different effect where it's affecting economic growth, and the higher interest rates might be affecting interest growth. So they have achieved the inflation objective, but it's affecting growth. So we explained this, and the Minister of Finance had to do this in the context of explaining the world in which we operate. But I've explained here too that the rising interest rates globally have not impacted Guyana. So it may affect countries like Guyana, but it has not impacted us. And why was this so? Because our loans are fixed interest loans, and that the only two variable interest loans we have are both to multilateral agencies and not private creditors. So we did not get affected by this spike in interest rates over the past 3 years. So what you're saying there is a generic discussion on global issues by the Minister of Finance. We made it clear that what our borrowing will focus on. And our borrowing will focus on the capital projects. And the last time I outlined in which sectors. So I went on to speak about the 660 million from Exim Bank that will come in, and that even if we raise the debt ceiling to the level that it would be raised, it doesn't mean we have to borrow up to that level. That it is just to give us room should we have to do so. So I don't see any contradiction, because his comment about rising interest rates affecting countries is not affecting us here in Guyana for the reasons I told you, because of our debt strategy. And you heard earlier how our debt strategy is working. In fact, our debt servicing has come down to 6% of revenue. 6% of the revenue, which is one of the lowest. It must be the lowest in this region. So clearly, it is not stressing the fiscal in our case. And that is why there's much, much more room. If you consider where other countries are, there's significant room to borrow to fill that. Not that we will borrow, but there is significant room.
Secondly, you just said that it's projected that the interest rate will start declining, it's reached its peak. But if it continues to rise more and we'll have to take more from future budgets to go to debt servicing, will the government revise its financing plan?
But we don't anticipate that so we're not speculating. All the indicators are that it will come down. Okay, and that is why I explain right here too that when interest rates are falling globally, you also have to reconsider your borrowing strategy, which might be moving from fixed to variable. Because if you lock in at a fixed rate of 5%, say 5%, and then it falls to 3% globally because it was near zero, then your fixed rate borrowing is higher. You pay more on that, servicing that loan. So we don't anticipate any of that happening, but we have the room and we have flexibility. We can always prepay, for example, some of these if we anticipate that there are higher interest payments, etc. We can even prepay many of the loans in the future years.
Since the debate currently now, it's surrounding why government is borrowing so much. Can you explain to us why it's so if it's prudent to borrow so much now and spend so much currently?
But I just explained all of that. That's what I was explaining just now. That's exactly what I was explaining. You didn't drink some tea or coffee today. What
Dr.
do you
Singh
think I
also,
was explaining just now? You just getting stuck with the question there, man. You're trying to go back to your question when I gave you the answer already. Why? Why? Yeah, you don't want me to go. Let me go back a long thing. So, the country is expanding its capital. Everybody is right. We've expanded our capital budget in a massive way. The recurrent budget is constrained. Everybody has concluded that. The reason for the capital budget in economies where you can expand the capital budget, because should there be a shortfall in revenue, should there be, for example, for one reason or another, the low oil prices, etc., you can easily mothball projects, or when the projects are ended, the expenditure is done. So it's not recurrent. It doesn't come back in the budget the future year. So when the road is built, it's done. So you don't have to the following year make that expenditure again, or the bridge, or the power plant. So that is one way of ensuring that we don't become like a Venezuela or many of the other countries. What many of those countries did, they splurged on the recurrent budget. So when the shortfall of revenue came about, and inevitably that will happen, they could not sustain those expenses in the long run. And those are expenses on pension, on wages and salaries, on whole range of social benefits, etc. And therefore, their society went into steep decline. And all the economic fundamentals got distorted. They ended up with you saw what happening. Massive, people don't have food, interest rates skyrocket, inflation rate was thousands of percent. We talk about 2% and 4%. In some of these countries, 1,000%. We saw it in Suriname too. We saw it in Suriname. The exchange rate moved from 3 guilders to 1 to 3,000 guilders to 1. What happened? So that is prudent. So you borrow to invest. If you borrow to eat, it's bad. If you borrow to invest, and the investment in the future will increase your income or save you expenditure, like the gas to energy project will, then it's a good investment. It enhances the capacity of the country, improves people's lives. Even if you borrow for it, the borrowing has to be paid back in the future. But if a smaller share of your revenue progressively is going towards this, we sustain this economy when we're spending 100% of revenue to service debt. Now it's 6% of revenue. We have room to sustain it in the future. And it would fall even lower when in the future years when the revenue goes steeply up. That's why.
Okay, while in the budget speech as well, Dr. Singh mentioned that global inflationary measures loom large, hinting that cost of living could get higher in 2024. Guyana could be affected by this too, if commodity prices continue to shift and so forth. How does the government plan to combat this should this happen in Guyana?
So there are a number of things. Let me get back to this point. So do you believe that we should build community roads? That's come back to APNU. So the 100 billion that we have to build nearly 3,000 roads in the villages, in the wards, in our city, in all right across the country, in the Amerindian communities, improving lives. Do you think we should build it or we should just leave it? It comes back to that question. So they don't want us to do this. But what does this represent? It's 250 to 300,000 people now will not have proper community infrastructure. Do they believe we must fix all 34 grounds in Georgetown because there's a substantial allocation for that? Clearly their answer is no, you shouldn't do that. You're spending too much on capital. Do they believe we should bridge the river? No. I saw Christopher Ram saying, oh, the Berbice Bridge, we're thinking about another fixed structure across the bridge. But this was the same Christopher Ram who was opposed, if you go back in history, was opposed to the building of the floating structure. And now that structure, the concession period comes to an end in 2027. We are now nearly 3 years away from that. That bridge will basically, that was the concession period. We made it clear even then that you had to in the future put in a fixed structure across the bridge. But what does a fixed structure represent? Just how the floating structure changed people's lives. I recall people used to come from Berbice to take their families to the airport, and their families would meet in New York and they will not get home back to Berbice because there are long lines of cars waiting to cross on the ferry over there. Sometimes days. You couldn't carry heavy trucks across, one truck. You think in this modern economy, we could have 3 trucks per trip on a ferry to go across, and 10 trips a day, 30 trucks. 30 trucks will go now in 15 minutes across the bridge. Different times. And you need a fixed structure to do that, so that it does open, it's all the time, you can have integration of the territory, etc. So this is, that static thinking is thinking of people who just are number crunchers. They don't look at the future of the country. So on global inflationary pressures, they loom larger in the COVID period. They've abated somewhat if you look at the global inflation numbers and because of this high interest rate policy. So they're abating somewhat. So, but we have to watch for spikes. And the spikes can come about because of a number of things. For example, what's going on in the Red Sea, or if there is an escalation of the war beyond Palestine, well, in the Israeli attack on Palestine, if there is an escalation, it could disrupt shipping lanes. Already that's happening for, say, European inflation. So, because they now have to use a different route to now get their goods into Europe. So if we're importing goods from Europe, could possibly, in a real world, not in the low world, where you can, you know what's the guy, the low man from the economist who's not economist, the low guy, he said you could have a world free of inflation, right? Guyana could be free of inflation, although the world has it. Well, that's not the case. But we have put in a sum of money, although we have seen the inflationary pressures abate. Last year, inflation was pretty low, so compared to previous years. And so we believe that the inflationary pressure has abated somewhat.
Moving away from the budget, can you provide us with an update on the activities of the British Marine vessel offshore? Yeah.
There's no update. It came, it went. There is no update. It came and it left.
It left, okay.
Yes.
That's what we wanted to know. You previously said that government will go to tender for independent monitoring of daily production rates being reported by Exxon. Was this catered for in the 2024 budget?
Yeah, in our framework, and we have various, because we have not tendered as yet, we don't know what exact cost it will be, but we have resources. I think it's over 7 million remaining from that 20 million. You remember the World Bank facility that was there a long time back.
When will the final production sharing agreements be made public?
Oh, I know it's been given to the contractors already, so it should could be in the public domain. If it's not in already, I'll just tell them to make it available public. But as you know, I said to you before that we're now making adjustments on the fiscal terms. So we can upload it anytime. I'll tell them to do so. If they haven't done so as yet, the ministry hasn't done so, I tell them to do it this week. So you can see it.
Okay, my final question. To what extent is the Amerindian community aware of the Petroleum Activities Act, and were they consulted as a group? This is on the basis of opposition member of Parliament Vincent Henry called for it to be repealed on the basis that it violates the right to free, prior, and informed consent because the minister has the power over the sector. So we want to know if they were ever consulted on this petroleum.
Which minister has the power over it? Are you saying that every law that we pass now, we have to get the free, prior, informed consent of all the villages in the Amerindian communities? Any law that this country passes now in Parliament, whether it's to do with us going to Timbuktu or going to the moon or buying equipment for the army, if we pass a law or national sovereignty, we have to get free, prior, informed consent. Free, prior, informed consent is when the activities affect the lives of the people who live in these villages and their communities directly, not through an indirect extension of the government. With our constitution doesn't confer that right on any group of people in this country. So we made enormous progress in enhancing the rights of indigenous people by doing several things. By passing the Amerindian Act, which gave basically some form of subsurface rights to indigenous communities, the ability of the community to make rules for self-governance in those communities, a sure pathway to land titling and the conditions under which it will be done. We then, in the Constitutional Reform Commission, the new constitution, we put in place an Indigenous Peoples Commission. We respect the principle of free, prior, informed consent, but as they relate only to activities, so for example, impacting directly on the villages. So the plans that the villages had to put together for development of their villages and spending the money that we are giving to them through the LCDS, they had to give free, prior, informed consent through a meeting of the village with 2/3 of the members in attendance and to vote in favor of the plan, and they had to send us the minutes of that to see that it's done. But that as it relates to spending through the LCDS and those sorts of activities, not for any law in this country. So you ask Norton if he supports that. APNU didn't even want to give them more land, much less to do something of this nature. APNU, remember APNU said, if you get more land, you can't get any benefit from the oil and gas sector. That is an APNU minister saying to the Amerindian community in this country. Now, this same Henry, who was part of it and was, you talk about cronyism too, you forgot the SLED, a program. He was part of the crony class in the SLED. He now wants to extend it to any law. So we can't pass a law on the budget. You have to get now, before Ashni Singh raises the debt ceiling, or now he would have to go and get the free, prior, informed consent from 242 villages. He has to go there. Are you saying that? You need to make sense to some of these things that people talk about. Some sense. You know, when you make these clownish kinds of statements in the parliament, then it's just like really, I have to waste my time responding to them. Yes.
Earlier this week, Minister Barrett said that in 2024, more emphasis will be placed on critical minerals such as lithium. Can you give us an insight into how this can propel Guyana's development?
Yes.
And another question. I know that last month the request for proposals for the Amila Hydro project was concluded. Can you also give us an update on that?
Yeah. So the I don't have all the details on the Amila. When it was supposed to close when last week, I think. Last week? Last Monday. When last month? Oh, I haven't looked at it, so no use I give you an update. I can commit to giving you the update at the next week because I haven't looked at the Milo, how many bids we receive or anything of that sort was engaged. So that on Amila. On the critical mineral, so we have to do a mineral map. We have to look at, probably spend a bit more money now on doing this mineral map, assessing resources internally. We were talking at some stage about all the information we gather should be open source information. So once you do the surveys, you upload it. Because what has happened in the past is that some surveys were done by the government in the distant past, and those results were shared only with a few people, including staff, and they knew who to guide where, like, you know, there may be good properties. So whatever we do now in the future, and just look, so whatever we do now in the future, and just looking at all the minerals, will be open source. So once we finish the survey, we'll have to do it. But it's not just lithium, it's many other minerals that we're looking at, expanding the mineral map of the country. Yeah. We're in January, right?
Yes. Good afternoon, Vice President
Yeah.
Kamal King, or I'll know what that means.
So if you look at the Argyle Declaration, I don't have it here before me, but I think there was one clause in the declaration which speaks about a joint commission. And this is the first meeting of the joint commission. So the joint commission has to meet and discuss their own agenda and then pursue those discussions. So we are hoping that there's some of these elements could be discussed as part of fostering good neighborly relations in the future. We made it clear that we are going to go take this matter to its conclusion at the ICJ. And whatever that outcome, and we believe that it will be a favorable outcome for Guyana, given that Venezuela has been unable to provide a shred of evidence that the 1899 award was flawed, that the outcome should be favorable to us. But even beyond that outcome, we will still be neighbors, and we'd still need to have relationships outside of the border issue. And so we are hoping, as part of that confidence building measure, and I think this was the intent of the people who were in St. Vincent at Argyle, that the discussion at this level, in the Joint Commission level, could help to move us closer to that atmosphere. Now, a report from this Joint Commission will go to the presidents when they meet. And then they also will determine what they want to discuss further. So that joint commission now has been put together, and they're meeting in Brazil.
Okay, thank you. With respect to where we are in the auction, am I to understand that the negotiations are entirely complete and that the the concerns that ExxonMobil had raised about the model contract, those have been ironed out between the two sides?
I'm not going to comment on details as yet. Until we close, then you would have a statement, and you will see the contracts, because whatever we sign, we'll make public. We made that clear. All contracts will be made public. This week you will see the PSA. I'll tell them to upload the PSA. And then you will see these issues, because if it's ironed out at the technical level, it hasn't come to us. I want to see, when it comes to us at the political level, whether the ironing out of differences has compromised any of our principal positions. And so that's why I don't want to comment at this stage until we see the drafts where there's agreement on all sides, to see if those drafts accord with our instructions.
Okay, you mentioned last when we discussed the auction that where we are now is on the company submitting documents for the due diligence process.
That's what, yeah.
Is that the only item on the agenda before
That's
this
what
is
I'm told,
concluded?
that they have to submit additional documents.
Okay.
So this is still at the technical level. When it's at the technical level, we don't call them every day and say, you do this and do that. They have generalized instructions. They go their work there. When the technical work is done, then it comes to us policy-wise, and we review the documents and we say, is this what we wanted? Are the agreements in keeping with our instructions? And then at that stage, we have the political input, and then it's finalized.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned last week as well that the government has an internal estimate for the size of the population that's closer to 1 million.
Yeah, this is a crude, yes,
Okay.
crude estimate that we've been doing. We're working with, it's a planning kind of figure that we use. We use 900,000. Yeah.
If following the conclusion of the census, there is a higher revision of the country's population, I imagine this would affect some of our metrics with respect
Yeah,
to...
but we don't manage from metrics. And that is the point I try to say to people. We don't manage from metrics. We manage for outcome. So I don't put great store in if the per capita GDP goes up by $1,000 or come down by $1,000. It's not, we don't manage from metrics. We don't manage for ratios too. So a lot of people say, look at the size of the fiscal deficit. If in that fiscal deficit or expenditure now, although it's 8% of GDP and maybe it was 5% of GDP in the past, but in there our capital expenditure has grown tenfold, and it's going to solve electricity problems, cooking gas problems, transportation problems, health problems for our people. That's the objective. We don't manage for the metric. But the metrics have to be taken account in terms of your sustainability planning.
So you wouldn't expect any such revision to affect the government's development planning in any way?
Nothing whatsoever, because we don't manage for metrics.
Okay, I'd like to know, with respect to the loan that you intend to take from the Exim Bank, the $660 million loan, this would be one of the biggest loans that Guyana has ever taken. if it's approved, what would be your specific debt servicing strategy for this loan? Or would there be a more generic
Yeah,
debt
yeah,
service?
but each loan has the conditions of the loan. It would have the amount, the interest rate, the period for repayment, if it's paid in monthly installments or 6 monthly installments, the details of it. So each loan is guided by its own set of conditions. So when those are concluded with Exim Bank, then the loan document will be tabled in Parliament. So you can then see what they are.
Is there any update on the Whiptail review? Has there been any trouble, any disagreements?
What
Review of the Whiptail project that ExxonMobil has
Oh,
proposed.
no, no. As far as I'm concerned, they told me they're working towards the end of the first quarter. They still maintain that schedule.
Dr. Jagdeo,
Yes.
Guyanese critic for the Daybreak News. As much as you brushed aside Aubrey Norton's claims as rhetoric and claims to violence, with the suggestion that he and his ilk will be met with the full extent of the law, are you suggesting the same law that stood by while people went and looted the Mondrapo market, after which Norton came and represented the criminal elements? Are you suggesting that same law? Or do you have a strategic plan for this time, since the game of elections and power has, gone up so much more, and so much more is at hand here to gain?
So a number of people in that case, so this ostensibly came out of a protest for justice, and it deteriorated into almost terrorist type of activities, led by many people there. The people in Golden Grove have the right to protest peacefully, and I think in that case, maybe justifiably so, to protest peacefully. But when it crossed a threshold, a criminal threshold. Now people were compensated in that area, so the Treasury should be utilized to do that where there is a failing on the part of the state. The Treasury must bear or compensate people. And two, a number of those people were charged and under the Terrorism Act, and they're still before the court. So action was taken against the offenders, and now they're before the court. Sometimes it's hard to prevent things that happen spontaneously, so you have to take action, firm action afterwards. I am more in favor of the police building an intelligence capability and being able to take firm action to act as a deterrent. And it must be also guided ethically, because the police did take firm action in some cases when they shot pellets at a number of people who were protesting against the attempt to steal the elections. But they were protesting if they didn't protest, then maybe we would have had a very different country today. And they took firm action right at the beginning by shooting pellets at a number of people who came to see me. Some of them have 30-something, 40 pellets in their body, and women, etc., under the Granger administration. But they were protesting the attempt by the Granger and the others to steal the elections, Norton and the others, to steal the elections. So sometimes you have to look at the cause. And in this case, people have a right to protest causes, but peacefully. And we will respect their right, but if they harm other people, then we'd have to take strong action. And that's what I would repeat.
Dr. Jagdeo, just to get it a little more clear, in the past, the armed forces, like the Guyana Defense Force, lost AK-47s, a number of AK-47s that end up in the hands of bandits that were called freedom fighters and supported by the PNC. What is the strategic plan to ensure things like this? Because you're saying they will face the full extent of the law. What law? This is a law that's been lacking in the past, a security force that has been lacking in the past. What strategic plan is there?
So there are lots of things. You want me to outline again the criminal history of the PNC. So a lot of the weapons that we found in the hands of the bandits could be traced back to an era when those weapons were taken from the army and transferred to the headquarters of the People's National Congress. They happened in the period around which Walter Rodney was assassinated by the PNC. You'd recall the Commission of Inquiry into the Rodney death, that question was raised, and the individuals who signed out those arms to the PNC from the army identified. Those weapons were never returned to the army. In the crime wave, a lot of those weapons were found on individuals. So why do you think that APNU, in spite of them talking about the trouble period, Granger likes to speak about the trouble period, never conducted an inquiry into what happened there? Because we know we didn't need an inquiry to tell us that the PNC operatives were going into Buxton and encouraging people to participate in this. Granger then went and conducted a commission of inquiry into Lindo Creek, where the security forces were accused of killing those people, falsely accused. So it tells you whose side he was on, not the security forces. But in that very same period, you had Winston Felix and Collins, who headed the army. Both of them became members of APNU, and they're in the leadership of the PNC now. Leadership of the PNC, I think, in their central committee. The difficulties we had in ensuring that they carried out lawful instructions from the Defense Board, etc., were enormous. And therefore, you had a situation where the army and the police were undermining carrying out their legitimate functions. People forget that. They'd forget the call from Basil Williams to Winston Felix saying at Agricola, boy, you help us out. I don't know what he meant today, but when the massacre took place at Agricola. So we know that this was described by US agencies as a political insurgency. This was just a crime wave. So it's a political insurgency. At the end of it, every single one of those people were either apprehended and in prison or killed by the security forces. So justice has been meted out to them, or at the end of it. But it created turmoil in this country. The capacity to create turmoil is an disruption. PNC has demonstrated that all the time. But this country has withstood everything they thrown at us, even in the tough days when they had greater control over people by pushing the racism. And we've withstood it. And we'll withstand it again now. And now I believe I have greater confidence in the security forces and their ability to pursue justice fairly in accordance with the the Defense Act and all the laws governing the police force. That they have a capability, they have demonstrated that. And what I was so pleased with, that when the period when they tried to steal elections, there was provocation and in fact an active attempt to get the army to intervene and to basically saying we will install Granger and run the country, and they refused to do so. So I have greater confidence now that any attempt to disrupt the peace will not go unanswered. We have this time more ever than ever in our history, we have a capacity and a willingness in our security forces to comply with the law. We've had a tough time. It's not easy when you're running a country and trying to keep peace and protect people, and you have the head of the army and the head of the police force who undermine you at every turn for political reasons. It's not easy, but at the end of it, we overcame all of that, all of it. So I have no doubt that Norton's mutterings here, I said I'm not taking him too seriously because it's clearly delusional when he said they would win the elections. But I made it clear that if he breaks the law, he's going to face the consequences too. Yes.
Dr. Jagdeo, one last question. Recently in Parliament, there was an incident where it was just short of you being assaulted by an opposition MP. How is government treating that, and how are you looking at your security from here on, since the dangers are from within?
There are lots of haters, right? And APNU singles me out. I saw their rally there. They had a cost of living. They cussed me throughout. They had a placard, get rid of the bad rat. You know, the bad rat and stuff like that. It's something that will now go away from APNU. They will keep cussing me all the time. They hate me with a passion, and some of their wild influences too, because of what I stand for. And it doesn't, like some, I think, say GHK Lal mentioned something that he could say I'm corrupt, because they've said that before 1,000,000 times. But they had 5 years to prove it in opposition, didn't do it. He could say, it could call me all names. So he was saying that he could call me all names under the sun and I don't get angry. But when he speaks about Exxon, I get worked up, as though I'm in the pocket of Exxon. And the reason why, I don't take the ad hominem attack seriously. I don't care too much what they think of or say of me. It's not arrogance. It's just that I know who I am. And I know why they hate me. And they're not going to change what I'm doing. They're not going to change what I'm doing. And I know that what I'm doing is for the good of the people of this country. That's why I will take them on the Exxon issue, but will not take them on when they're vile. The same GHK Lal, when he cusses me personally. Because for me, that doesn't bother me too much. But when you take on an issue and you distort it, like Glenn Lal and his type have been doing, where they could harm the future of this country, our children, by being extreme in their views now. These people haven't contributed anything. GHK Lal was living abroad under some Wall Street. What if I say I've heard rumors of him being a pedophile? He says all kinds of things. I heard Jagdeo is corrupt. I heard rumors of him being a pedophile, but he was overseas. Came back recently as an analyst, so-called analyst from Wall Street. I see they dropped that now, and been sponging off of the government under APNU. And now, obviously, he is upset with it. But that doesn't bother me. But he's come back now, and they form part of a narrative to chase away people, investors from this country in every sector. Glenlal, oh, you're taking away the forest resources, so nobody must invest in forestry. Oh, the bauxite people are taking away our bauxite. So the people lost their jobs, the 1,000 jobs in Kwakwani, all of them gone quiet. Now they're after the oil and gas industry. That's $60 billion of investment. That's maybe about 10 times the amount of investable resources we have in the whole country. Now, how are we gonna get that? And then they wanna chase everybody away. So, but they're bread well buttered. That's why I will take them on, because they're trying to harm the future of our country and our people, and that gets me worked up. That would bother me, not the personal attacks on me. So that thing with this Cummings, I'm sure if all of them had their way, they would try to do me harm. But I told the police, don't bother with her. Just leave her, man. She's crazy or something. I don't bother with her. She might be just crazy, yeah, lady. So that's how I'm dealing with that. I don't bother with it. Personal things don't bother me too much. Thank you.